good, sorry. All right. Chapter 9, the transaction process. Learning objectives for the evening. We'll describe the steps involved in the transaction process from contract to closing. We'll prepare a list of tasks to be done in preparation for closing by the closing agent. We'll list the tasks to be done by the buyer and the seller before closing. We'll describe a face-to-face closing, including where it might be held, individuals who attend, and any special considerations. We'll identify the items to be deposited by the seller and by the buyer in an escrow closing. We'll discuss the impact of a Taxpayer Relief Act and the Consumer Protection Act on closings. We'll identify the practices that are prohibited by the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, or RESPA. We'll define the disclosures required by the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act. And lastly, we will identify items that are typically prorated at closing. All right, remember I was saying yesterday the first step is to get a loan approved, because you will have clients that will waste your time in the beginning. You'll show them a bunch of properties, and then they'll ghost on you, and you actually lost money because you spent all that time with gas and all of that, and you got nothing out of it. So you're going to want to get them to get a loan approval, get pre-approved, not pre-qualified. Pre-qualified means nothing. So pre-approval up to a certain amount prior to selecting the property. So before you even go out and look for a property, you're going to want to get them pre-approved first. So this will be the first step. And upon selecting a specific property, the borrower will make a formal loan application. And it's on a uniform residential loan application, and that's going to be used by most lenders. And that's going to list the assets and liabilities, or the assets and the debts, in order to determine the net worth. And once net worth is determined, they will go through the approval process, and it usually takes about 3 days, as we see here, 3 days, and that's big. They will test you on that. The lender must provide the borrower with a loan estimate of all closing costs, including obtaining a settlement on a mortgage loan within 3 days of the application. So it's a pretty quick process to get approved like that, but within 3 days they have to, and there's no exceptions. You will need to know that for the test. They will test you on it. And on the loan estimate, that's going to break down all the closing costs and costs involved in the buying process. So any costs that the buyer will have to make during closing costs, all that stuff will be in the loan estimate. So they've got approved. They've got the loan application back. They're approved for a certain amount. So they select a property, and they're going to run your credit report. And credit report's a big one. Ms. Vita, if someone comes up to you and they say, I have bad credit, can you help me get into a house? What would you tell them?
Sure. An application, see how much
Most people would say no. They would say, get on out of here. I don't need any of that. You got way too low credit. But there is ways for you to fix your client's credit. And if you do help them fix their credit, it might not close for another, 6 months or so. But if you do help them with your credit, you've got a client for life, pretty much. And it's say you do 10 of those a week, and you don't get paid right then, but 6 months down the line, if you got 10 $200,000 homes, I mean, that's a lot of money. That's like a $60,000 payday. So credit report or credit repair is a big one, and we do have methods for helping people to do that. So good that you said yes. A lot of people would say, no, I don't want to even deal with that. Get on out of here. So for the appraisal is also a big one. Remember I told y'all before, you need to, if you have a lender involved, you need to, they're going to get an appraisal, period. No questions asked, there will be an appraisal. And the appraisal is to ensure that the property used as collateral for the loan is adequate for the recovery of the lender's investment in case of default. So if the buyer defaults, the appraisal will validate the amount that they loaned so that they can take, if they do default, they can take that property back and recover on their investment. So let's say, I've had this happen before too, because an appraisal can make or break your deal. Let's say you have a contract for $300,000, and then you're getting past the option period and all of that, and then appraisal comes back, and appraisal says the house is worth $320,000. Someone has to make up that $20,000 difference, or the buyer will walk, because they can agree who pays it and whatnot like that, but at that point, the buyer will most likely walk because they don't want to pay that extra $20,000. So an appraisal can make or break your deal. It's very important. Because if it comes in too low, it's the same situation as if it comes in too high. Someone's got to make up the difference, and I've had this happen to me before in one of my transactions. We were in contract for $293 and property appraised for $314, and that transaction ended up falling through because there was a over $15,000 difference. And the appraisal, the uniform residential appraisal report is what you will get when they do an appraisal. Also, title must be clear. That's a big one. For them to approve the loan, they're going to want proof that title is clear. And once they have that, they will approve the loan. And homeowners insurance, that's a really big one as well. You will be required to get homeowners insurance if your client is a buyer. And let's say one day your buyer decides they want to drop their homeowners insurance because it's starting to get too expensive. Well, the lenders will find out about it, and when they do, they'll send you a letter that says you need to reinstate this immediately. And if you do not, then we will get it for you, and we'll put the cost of that into escrow. So if you don't have it, they will make you get homeowners insurance. So after all of that, we have the loan. We have the loan approval. We have all of that. It goes into underwriting. The loan will go into underwriting, where an underwriter approves, rejects, or returns the package to process for further requirements. So they'll either say, okay, everything's good, we approve it. They'll say no. Some things need to be changed, we're going to send it back, or they will just straight reject it. And that's what happens when it goes through underwriting, because after that, it'll go to final approval. And final approval is valid for a limited time only. That's a big one. Limited time. You have a limited time to do things in real estate. If you miss a deadline, you can end up costing your client thousands of dollars, and you could even lose your client. You must meet your deadlines. Let's say if I have a client and they put in a contract, we got the contract receipted. I went to the title, I received the contract. I'm thinking, we're done. We have a contract. We're good. But I don't send the contract to the lender. And then a few days before closing, we find out that the lender hasn't even started the loan process because he didn't even know. And then at that point, you'd have to push closing. The client's going to be super, super pissed at you because you didn't do your job. So just make sure all parties are notified. Once a contract is received, you need to send it to the other agent, you need to send it to the lender. Because the title company will already have it because they received it and they know about it. But the lender will not. And loan processes can take several days to go through. So, you would have to push closing back. So make sure you meet your deadlines. It could be very bad if you did not. Okay, so at this point, the client has gotten approval. They found a house. They put an offer on a house. They received the contract, notified the parties, sent it to the lender, and only then do you get to inspections. Inspections are not before a contract, they are after a contract.
So you go through the whole checklist of everything,
You go through all of that before you even get to
and
inspections.
then after the inspection, it just all falls through.
And after inspections, it could fall through, yeah. So usually it's not too bad. This minor thing here needs to be fixed, minor thing here needs to be fixed, but sometimes, yeah, it could kill a deal. But before that, but before inspections, this hasn't happened yet. Final approval has not happened at this point in the process. We're just now to inspections. But any contingencies on the contract must be resolved before closing. You can't close if you have untied up ends. If you have contingencies that were not met, then you can't close. And home inspections, those are highly recommended for all buyers, especially first-time home buyers. Remember I told you one of my clients, they chose to waive their right to an inspection, but to do that, we also sent him, a form that says, this is why you need to get an inspection. So you just need to make sure clients know how important an inspection really is, because you're not going to know what's wrong with the house until it's been inspected. And Justin can probably tell you this, and I will too. We highly, highly recommend that your buyer be present during the inspections. Highly recommend that.
Yes.
And you as well as the agent should be present at the inspection. If something goes wrong and the client's not there and they don't know about it, it could cause problems later on as well. It's just a really good idea to have your client at the inspections with you as well. At least one of them. If it's a husband and wife, at least one of them there is fine. But yeah, it's a really good idea to have that.
Basically, it's a lot easier to, one, if they have questions, they can get them answered by the inspector, but also sometimes it's hard just going through an inspection report and understanding fully what is happening. It's a lot easier when it's there and he goes, ooh, you're going to have to get the roof replaced because of this. And you go, why? What do you mean? Then they can actually explain in further detail as opposed to just getting a picture and then it just says, shingles falling off. What is that? So what do I do with that? Like, it's a little bit easier to ask your questions and kind of get a little bit further in depth detail. So that's why I know for every inspection I've done, I've almost forced my clients to be there. Unless something very serious is happening, you need to be there.
You need to be here.
Yeah.
And we know about the option period. I've talked about that with y'all. The option period is the time that you have to terminate a contract, which is usually 7 to 10 days. It's a normal option period. But option period does not start the day you execute the contract. Option actually starts the day after you execute a contract. Okay, so we got the home inspections, and now we're going to get to title work. And this is where the lender is going to require proof of clear title before granting the final approval of the loan. And there will be title insurance. There's lender's funding, the onus policy. We're not going to go into detail on that. Y'all will cover that in an entire chapter, I believe, in another class later on. I think is it contract forms, Justin, I believe? Yep. So we're not going to go into detail on those, but after all of that, the lender will require the proof of clear title. Once they have that, they will grant the final approval of the loan. Yeah, so you got to make sure title commitment is good. You got to make sure your title is good. And now we're closing agent. Now we're preparing for closing. So we got approved. We found a house. We put in a contract. We notified the parties. We sent to the lender. We got inspections. We went through appraisals. Appraisals are going to be after inspections usually, because it can take a while to schedule a appraisal. So now we got title works done. We're clear on title, so we're good to go there. And so now we're moving to the closing. So those are the steps that we've covered so far. Everybody good with those? Do we have any questions online? You good? Cool. So the closing agent is going to prepare a deed and the closing disclosure, which is an accounting of the parties' debts and credits. You'll get the closing disclosure 3 days. Remember, 3 days. You'll get it.
I'll tell you, I have an example that we can pull up.
Okay, yeah. So we'll actually pull up an example of a closing disclosure for y'all to see. It's pretty informative. We had to do this. We had a meeting with, was it Trek or is it the National Association, and they showed us. We had someone come here and show us all of that, so it'll give you an idea of what you'll see before that. But 3 days before closing, you will get that, and you will see the debts and the credits. So a debit on a closing disclosure is a charge that the party must pay. I'm sorry, a debit is something they must pay. A credit is an amount a party has already paid. So what? Option money. Debit or credit? Credit. Because the buyer has already paid the option money. Something they have already paid counts as a credit.
Got you.
Yep.
Got you. Already is credit.
What? Earnest money. Is that a debit or credit? What about attorney's cost for drafting a deed? Is that a debit or a credit to the buyer? Ms. Shelton.
An attorney's cost, is that what you said?
Mm-hmm. Attorney's cost. Is that a credit or debit to the buyer?
Debit?
Correct. You got it. Because they haven't paid that yet. That's usually at the end. All right. So the buyer will have to transfer utilities. If you have a listing of the house and the tenants or the owners move out, you should always have the utilities on, even if they're not living in the property during the showing. You should still have it on. So they'll have to transfer utilities and file a change of address, and that all happens before closing. Usually a few days before closing, that'll happen. And a huge one right here: conduct a walkthrough or final inspection. Justin's told me some crazy stories about sometimes when they don't do their final walkthrough, and then when they go to move in the next day, they found that the sellers had let their dogs just piss and crap all over the house. And it's because they didn't do their final walkthrough, they didn't see. It's very important that you do that, because it's going to verify that all necessary repairs have been made. So any agreements that y'all made on the contract, it's going to verify the repairs were actually made, that the property has been well maintained, and that all systems and fixtures are in substantially the same condition that they were in the time the contract was finalized. So the time that we put in our contract and receipted it We want to make sure that it's the same or better than we saw it when we decided to buy it. So that's a big one. You're going to want to conduct a final walkthrough always. Always do that. It just protects your buyer and yourself as well. Just remember, never go to a closing without a final walkthrough. And so that's all happening prior to closing. And so the buyer will review the loan estimate and the closing disclosure, and then obtain a cashier's check or certified funds to bring to closing. Now, a big one for this is wire transfers. Sometimes, Justin told me one time a story. Somebody they got a call saying, "Hey, we're conducting the closing or whatever. We need you to send the money to XXX." Guy sends the money, then they go to closing, and the agent's like, "Have you wired the money?" So, "We don't have the money." "What do you mean you don't have the money? I wired it yesterday." "No, you didn't wire the money. You got scammed," and they will do that. It's a big one. It happens a lot. So
That's also why, as an agent, like I know for me, I will never give wiring instructions to anybody.
Yep.
If my client needs to wire, whether it's earnest money or option money or the closing funds or whatever, and they go, "Okay, well, where do I wire it to?" That's like the only time I go, I can't help. I'm not gonna go, "Well, let me call title and I'll get the numbers for you and I'll call you back and exchange everything." Because even if I'm not trying to take it, all it takes is me messing up one number. Suddenly, all the money's missing, and it comes back on, "Well, you gave me the account number," and I'm like, "Well, I didn't do nothing." Like, it comes back on me. And the same thing with, even if title gets the money, but somebody at title realizes they didn't give it and they want to take the money, then the same sort of thing. They can say they never got it, and it comes back on me still. So, just anytime anybody needs to wire anything, I've done that with earnest money and option money. Somebody's in a different town and they need to send earnest money to the title company. I say, "Cool, you can call the title company at this number, explain who you are and what transaction you're doing, and tell them you want to wire earnest money, and they'll give you the details."
when you wire the money, you need to get on the phone with the title company.
Yeah.
When you wire the money, just put it in my account. That particularly applies to Shelton. Anything, just it goes straight in my account. and we're
Good thing
good.
is, that is commingling of funds. Now Justin is
That
no
sounds
longer.
weird.
So,
So when you're doing that, you want to make sure that the client is, if they're doing a wire transfer, just make sure they're on the phone with the title company at the time of transfer.
There actually was a case, I think I told you, Stephen, a while back, and I don't know, Travis, I told you, it actually happened to Houston. A woman that was either a doctor or some high-end position, but she's going to close on her house. Bought this big old house. I think it was $400,000 or $500,000 or whatever, just in cash. And she got, that night before closing, she got wiring instructions that had changed. And so she went to her bank, went down and said, "Oh, we need to change it. It's going here." And because it looked all official. So she changed it. She went to closing, sat down, signed everything. The title person said, "Well, I just need your check." And she said, "Well, no, I already wired it." And they said, "No, ma'am, it's not been wired to us. We don't have it." And they're like, "No, y'all sent me this deal." So she pulled up her stuff and all, and they were like, "No, ma'am, that's not our deal." Come to find out, she lost all of that money, every penny. She could not buy the house. She defaulted on that. I think they even sued her because she didn't default. It was a big old mess. So you never, ever tell your client to ever give wiring information, or you have them get any calls. If they get any notice of change in wire, they need to call the title company and make sure that title company gave them that information. So
title
somebody
company
that
will not just email you.
yeah, they're not just
Yeah,
going
title
to email
company
you.
will not just
It's like,
email
"Oh,
you.
by the way, they're not,
Hey,
they're
son,
not,
LMAO.
And you probably know,
It's
tell
changing.
somebody who's been at the wire, or the title
Exactly.
company.
exactly.
Oh, no.
If you Venmo me right now, I'll wire it for you.
Oh, yeah.
Send me the money I got.
So it does happen. You just gotta be really careful with
And
wire
there's
transfers.
There's a form, and I guarantee you, if you're at my firm, there's a form that is called the wire disbursement notification. and you're going to have your client sign that form, because that form states that any changes in wiring, it is the buyer's responsibility or seller's to contact the deal, because otherwise, guess what happens?
Liabilities on you.
If you say you as an agent, Miss Vita got the deal, okay, and then you sent it to your client Wyatt because it looked official and you forwarded it to Wyatt. Well, if you didn't have that notice signed and he relied on you, guess who gets to pay that money? If I'm sponsoring you, me and you both have
You
to
ain't
pay
gonna
for
pay it.
that. You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So you got to make certain, and if he signed that form, it's stating that Wyatt will end up contacting to verify that stuff. But whenever I get wiring instructions, I immediately will contact whoever the title company is, and I'll say, "Hi, Stefan, we just got this deal that says something about changing the wiring. Did you send that?" And if he says no, then immediately I'm going to report that to the police, and I'm going to let Stefan know too, so that can be remedied. So, but yes, it has happened a couple of times actually. So you got to be very careful, because your
Well, I'm
money
sure
could
it's
just
happened.
be gone.
I'm sure it's happened more than a couple of times. And if you make a mistake and cost your client money, they're gonna come after you for the money. And Justin ain't paying it. He's gonna go, "You pay it. You did this."
They're going to come after my E&O, and then my E&O is going to say, "We're going after them."
Yep.
So
It's
that's
gonna be-
just how it works.
It's gonna be a big old mess. So just be careful of that when someone is doing a wire transfer. Be aware they could be scammed. So that's what a buyer will need to do for closing. Now here's what a seller will have to do for closing. Pack and confirm moving day and time. That's a big one. A lot of people don't do that. And yeah, sorry.
No, I just, yes.
A lot of people will not do that. And come to find out, they haven't even started moving out their stuff, and you're already in closing.
Wow.
It happens. And remove any items that are not to convey. That should have been done before you even listed the property. Any items that you didn't want to convey, you should have taken out.
Unless they're like set dressing, that like furniture that you want to be there to show the house or whatever. But as far as any personal items like TVs and whatnot, if that's not going, it's best just to take it out beforehand so there's no confusion when you get to closing. Well, one thing Justin says that he puts in all his contracts is any personal property that is left on the property at the time of funding becomes property of the buyer. So you're basically putting in there that, like, if you leave all your stuff, I'm not going to have the moment where I go to the house to move in and all your stuff's still there, and you're like, well, give me a day or two, and I'm like, I don't have a house now, like, you got to go. So just at that moment, it all becomes mine. Sucks for you, like, that's in the contract, so that's one thing that he puts in there just to keep your buyer from getting in that catch-22 of they bought a house and sold their own house, and now they got nowhere to go because the seller they were talking to is like, well, my place isn't coming up for a few days, so I got to live here until this happens and whatnot. It's not on you. So
It's called a non-realty items addendum.
Yeah.
And we do use it. It basically just says at the time of closing and funding, if anything is left in the house, it belongs to the buyer now. So you don't have to go through that whole.
I actually had a situation that started me in doing it. Was my client had closed on a property, and we had funded, and the seller, so I had asked my client, do you want to do a final walkthrough? And the client was like, no, I'm out of town, I ain't worried about it. I said, do you want me to do it? No, don't even worry about it. And I said, okay, you don't want me to do it? You don't want to do it? Okay, no big deal. Well, when closing, we closed, did everything, did the whole 9 yards, everybody. Did it all. Got the funding, got everything done. Keys were in our hands. They went over to the property, and all of the seller's stuff was still there, not even packed up. And we had already funded. And then the seller said, well, I'll be out in about 2 weeks or so. And I was like, that's not part of our agreement. And so I called the other agent, and this is how seller's agents are, guys and gals. So say I called you, Miss Vita. I say, Miss Vita, your client Wyatt is still in the property. Please get him out. This was Vita's response, even though it wasn't you. Well, I've already got my money, so this deal's done. Thanks.
it's not good.
Amen.
And I was like, but that's your client. Well, it's done. I mean, that's your problem now. Bye. And they would never answer the phone again. So to solve that, I put any and all personal property left on after close or after funding is now the buyers. Because then what could have happened is my client could have walked out there, Wyatt, all your stuff is in there. My client could have walked in and said, cops, please take this trespasser off my property. And they would have taken Wyatt off the property, and everything Wyatt you had would have became the buyers.
And it's perfectly legal, because it was in the contract.
So,
Garage sale.
garage sale.
Really?
Oh, and then you find he's got some $2,000 statue or something like that. Yeah. I'd have to be pulling that off, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, don't need to remove any of that. Do that before you list the property, not after. Then you'll need to be put in charge of address and stop any newspapers if you get them. A lot of people don't do newspapers anymore. It's usually the older people. I actually did newspaper throwing for a while. Yeah, it's dying out. Internet's taking over.
Yeah. Really.
But yeah, you'll need to put the change of your address and to stop the newspapers. You'll need to collect instruction booklets and or warranties on appliances to give to the purchaser. So, so you got a warranty on your dishwasher, stuff like that, or maybe the refrigerator, washer and dryer conveyed. Maybe you need a manual or something for that. And they also need to collect all keys to the property to be turned over to the buyer. And that one, that's done after funding. And you never give the keys to your buyer until after everything is funded. So just make sure y'all remember that. If you don't want to give them ahead of time, you go in, who knows what they're going to do. And you'll have to verify that all conditions required by inspection or other contingencies have been met. So if there was something wrong with the house during the inspection, buyer and seller agreed to fix it, you gotta make sure it's fixed, and you need to make sure that any contingencies have been met. Because you can't close if you have contingencies that are not done. So that's several things that a seller will have to do when preparing for the closing. So more that they'll have to do, and people forget about the first bullet a lot, arrange for a thorough cleaning of the property before the final walkthrough.
Now, why in the world would Miss Vita want to go clean her house if she's selling?
It is common courtesy.
Well, Miss Vita, do you have a problem with the dog, just let some just deposits around the house? That's okay, right? If Stephen moves in, I mean, you're moving out.
Some deposits.
Yeah, just some some deposits around the house. That's no big deal.
Yeah, a little leaky in there.
Yeah, and the bathroom still has urine in it, and I mean, I don't see any problem. That's fine, right, Stephen?
You're in the cell.
Not if you're the buyer.
That's right. Y'all, I have literally seen it. I walked into properties and there's dog, everywhere. The bathrooms are still filled. Okay. It is, the dishwasher is just horrible. Like it's just bad. Like the whole thing is just terrible. So yes, it is common courtesy to at least please clean the property.
And it might not have looked like that when y'all put the contract in.
Yeah. And it's not in the contract, but it's just a decent thing to do.
It's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
If you see what I'm saying.
If you're a seller's agent, please urge them to do that. We all appreciate it. Thank you.
And if you think you're going to have problems with your client, I'll tell you this. Say, Vita, you're representing Wyatt, and you're representing him as a seller, and he's just a jerk to you the whole time, okay? And he's going to be a jerk even into closing and all of that. You may want to go in and write it up in the contract, or tell Travis, who's the other agent, hey, FYI, I don't know if this guy might actually clean the property, so you might want to put that in the contract. If you see what I'm saying, if you know that that's going to be an issue, because a lot of times it gives you kind of a stance where you can go talk to Wyatt and say, hey, they're asking also that you thoroughly clean the property. So would you mind please doing that?
If they don't and it's part of the contract, what would happen then?
they can come back and sue Wyatt for whatever the cleaning cost is.
It's in the contract.
It's in the contract. Now, if I'm representing Wyatt, of course, I would want that, but I mean, you can get a place cleaned for $100, $200. Like, and I've even got to the point where if I think it's a major thing, I personally will pay the $100 or $200 just to have the house cleaned.
Just to get it clean.
So it's just common courtesy, and it makes you as an agent look good because people will be like, well, every house she sells, she has them perfectly cleaned. So now 90% of the time, if Stefan's moving into Wyatt's house, even though it was thoroughly clean, Stefan still probably will go around and clean it again.
Probably.
Just because the fact is that
But the knowledge that it has been thoroughly cleaned before,
it makes you feel better.
makes
Yeah.
you, I mean, you don't want to buy a house and then go there the day you move in and it just is nasty. It smells bad, you know?
Mhm.
Yep, that's true.
And there are some bad smelling houses, let me
I've
tell
been
you.
in a couple.
There's some very, very bad smelling houses.
Y'all ever deal with hoarders?
Do what?
Y'all ever deal with hoarders?
Many times.
I haven't yet, but Justin has.
I've had my fair share.
And hoarders
Put it that
houses,
way. I've had my fair share.
Ooh, it's like a nightmare.
I've had them where they've taken their stuff out that they want and left everything else in the house. And my client had a burn party. So she took all the stuff and she put it in a big old pile because it was land. She took it all out, she put it in a big old pile and she lit it on fire. So
was any of it valuable at all?
everything was junk.
Yep.
Anything that was worth anything had already been, like, there was a couple of things in there that would have been nice, but there was feces and there was rats and then
Oh, yes. There's animals that go in there. It smells.
Yeah.
Hoarders will probably.
The very worst house, I'm glad you brought that. The worst house I ever saw, and I almost bought it myself. The house it was in a beautiful neighborhood, but the person that lived in it had passed away, and nobody had lived in it for 14 years. So when I went in, I opened the back door, and there was stuff all the way to the back door. And I was like, oh God. And I started seeing black mold on the wall.
Mhm.
And I stopped, walked back out, and I waited for my inspector. And he got there, and I said, come here. He took me in, or took me over there. I was like, look at this. He's like, yeah, I'll be right back. So I went back, got in his truck. He put on his hazmat suit and all this fixture stuff. And he walked back, and I was like, can I go? And he's like, you're not going in there. He's like, I'm going in and walking around and all. So he walked in, and he came back, and he's like, you're about to buy this? I was like, I'm about to buy this. And he's like, come here. And he gave me a hazmat suit. And he said, you're going to come in here with me. And so I'm in his wife's hazmat suit. So you can just imagine how tight it was. So we get in, and we start walking around the place. The toilet, guys and gals, had exploded all up on the walls.
Oh my gosh.
No joke. The whole bathroom, just everywhere. The living room, the structure had one of the support beams had cracked. Water from the roof had just been draining into the living room. It was a nightmare. A nightmare. And when he got under there and he looked at it and all, he's like, Justin, he said, I'm gonna be real honest with you. He says it's a good flipper. He said, but you're gonna need $200,000 probably to get everything, or $3,000 and bulldoze the thing down and hold on to the property. And I said, no. I said, I'm not even gonna deal with this. So I talked to their children and all, and one of the sons bought it, and the house is still there. Nothing's been done to it.
Wow.
It's still been sitting, and that was probably 5 years ago. So
It's probably gotten worse.
it's way worse, but it was bad. There was live termites through the whole house, and I was just like, no, this thing's gonna collapse.
What made you initially want to buy that?
She was going to sell it for $50,000,
Oh.
and I was like, if I can get it for $50,000, go in. I was thinking maybe 75 to fix it up. When we got in there and looked at it, no sir, no way was it going to be 75. And with the foundation and the termites and the black mold and all the other crap in it, and it had asbestos siding, it basically had to be gutted and rebuilt. And I said, Nope. I said, y'all figure it out. Well, I found out they eventually the brother bought it or something and only paid $25,000 for it. So I was like, shoot, I should have bought it for 25 and paid 3 and tore it down and just held onto the land, but I didn't think about it. So, but it's not too far. It's back this way and around, but it's still sitting there. So, oh yeah, but go ahead, Stephen. Keep on going, bro.
What a shame.
Yeah, she's probably got a million stories like that. And for those, we talked about mold. At that point, you'd probably need a hazmat suit. Or who knows what you could be inhaling.
Next time, just send Wyatt in first.
No,
He'll check it. If he dies, then we're good.
Pass it out.
He's got his black card.
No go.
There you go. There you go.
hard, no hazmat suit.
The car will protect him.
Right.
So the seller will also have to review the loan estimate. And sometimes they will be required to execute an affidavit of title, which is just a sworn statement where the sellers assure the title insurance company and the buyers that no defects to title have happened since they did the first title examination during the beginning of the contract. So that covers what the seller will have to do to prepare for closing, and they oftentimes don't do some of these. And now we're getting to actually conducting the closing. Depending on state law, the local custom, closing may be conducted through either these two things. A licensed escrow company, in which case the parties may execute documents separately and never meet. So the buyer and seller will never meet in that scenario. Or there's a face-to-face meeting, and the parties will meet at the escrow company or the title company, or I guess the lender's office or attorney's office, and they'll sign the documents. They'll sign all the releases and everything. And that will be a face-to-face. Sometimes face-to-face is not a good idea. If your buyer is not happy with some of the things that the seller has done, you may want to go this route where they never meet.
Have you ever done a face-to-face?
I have, and luckily they were on good terms. So
It would be on a couple. I don't know if you would be on that one. There was one that I had. My client was mad over $50. And he was like, I want to be there at that closing. I'm going to tell them a piece of my mind, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, Lord, please don't let them close at the same time that us.
Mhm.
And I called the title, I told the title, and they're like, well, we'll try our best, but we can't guarantee, because it was a small one-man little one-woman show type thing office. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a nightmare. Thankfully, they closed at 2. We closed at 10 a.m. So we weren't able to be there. But I have had some where my agents have gotten sick. Say, for example, Travis gets sick and he's got a closing down in, say, Galveston. Well, if Travis is sick, he can't get down to Galveston. I can't get down there. Sometimes you might have a client, say Stephen goes down to close, he's sitting in the lobby. Here, Ms. Vita, you come into the lobby. Stephen's selling, you're the buyer, and you and Stephen start talking, and next thing you know, you find out some stuff that was shady. And next thing you end up knowing, there's a big dispute, and then y'all both walk out. I've seen things like that happen before.
contract's dead.
Yeah. So there can be, that's one thing you never want the two clients to be together, because a lot of times real estate agents don't always tell the truth. That's one sad thing. And so they'll say, for example, this was actually an example a while back, one of my agents, she was selling a property. And an agent came from another company and said, oh yeah, my client only has $150,000. That's all he's got. He's a poor, destitute man, and blah, 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 blah. It was this whole sob story, okay? Well, we talked to our clients. Clients felt bad, so the client dropped it from 162 or something down to 150, just because they wanted to help the guy. Well, come to find out, the other agent didn't show up to closing. My agent was there with the client. This person comes in, they start chit-chatting, finding out that this guy ain't a destitute old man, he's an investor. And that guy got furious. Then he's like, well, I ain't selling my property to an investor, blah, 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 blah. And everything just blew up. So you most of the time want to kind of keep them
Separate.
separate. The only time it's a good thing is if they know each other or if it's been very good rapport. There are certain agents in town, they know that I'm not the type of person to do backstabbing. They won't even show up. They'll call and say, hey, I can't make it. You got it? Yeah, I got it. And we'll take care of it ourselves. But then they're, but that's when you go in and you kind of work it out. I mean, you just be nice. But in other situations, if you can't get along with the agent, you just, both of y'all separate. Don't try to close it.
Close on separate times.
It just makes things a lot easier.
I was asking because I've never closed face to face.
Yeah,
I've
he's
never met
because
I've
of
never
COVID
met
and
the
all.
other party in any transaction.
Yeah.
So it's like
Okay.
yeah, it's like any transaction I've done, I've never even met. If I'm the buyer's agent, I've never met the sellers. The other way around. So I just thought it was wonderful.
I was surprised we closed with both of them there, but there was good rapport. They were fine, so we had no issues. But like you said, things can happen.
Yeah.
And deals get completely blown apart.
Well, in my situation, I closed with my brother because he was selling to me. And let me tell you, he lied to me about that house.
Oh.
So that shook our relationship, and I still don't trust him.
Uh-oh.
So, yeah, I believe there's a lot of things they hide.
Oh yeah, people will hide things to get the money.
People will lie for money.
People will lie for money. It's crazy. It's crazy that happens, right?
You are
Really?
It happens. It
People
happens.
lie
For money.
but they lie?
For money.
So you mean that Wyatt has been lying to me this whole time?
I ain't never told lies.
You might be lying about the black card, but that's all.
You lie about that, y'all made that up. I wish I had this black card.
So yeah, sometimes, well, most of the time, I'm guessing, yeah, you're gonna want to keep them separate. But you know, sometimes you will do a face-to-face meeting if everything's okay. It's still risky. So that's we're conducting the closing still. Now we're in escrow. An escrow holder, an escrow agent, is the disinterested third party authorized to coordinate the closing activities. So in other words, they are not a part of the transaction in any way. They're just here to close the transaction and go through all the paperwork. The broker turns over the earnest money to the escrow agent, who deposits it into a special trust or an escrow account. And the buyer and sellers turn over required documents and it deposits the escrow agent prior to closing. So any deposits that need to be made will be done before closing, and documents all need to be signed and turned over. The IRS.
Oh, those are fun people. Y'all want to talk to them all the time.
All the time.
Have them come to your house.
I'd rather not. The IRS may require completion of a certain form. The form is the 1099-S statement. It's going to have the income of the seller, and it's going to show the seller's social security number on that form. Sometimes that might be required. Justin, what instance would you need such a form?
For the 1099-S?
1099-S.
That's if you're ending up, you have proceeds. Any proceeds in a situation that's going to be over a certain amount, you're going to end up having to get that for tax purposes.
For tax purposes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
So that's for tax purposes. And the seller may be exempt from paying capital tax gains under the Taxpayer Act of 1997.
Call it what? When
Uh,
did they
this-
remove that?
Do what?
When did they remove that? 1997?
1997 is when the act went into
Mhm.
effect. The seller may be exempt from paying the capital gains tax.
But it's been amended recently, wasn't it?
Everything's been changed.
Yeah, some things have changed, but the Taxpayer Relief Act basically says a single person, they are limited for 250,000 capital gains tax exclusion, and a married couple is 500,000 capital gains tax exclusion. And you will need to remember that. I remember seeing that on the test. A single person, 250,000. A married couple, 500,000 capital gains exempt.
And
And
that's just the first time.
believe so. Do
No,
what?
what this basically comes down is you get 250 in regards to as long as you meet the certain requirement, you get $250,000. So say you spent $100,000 on your house, you sell it for $350,000, you don't pay a penny in taxes as a single person. If you're married, you can sell it up to $600,000 and not pay any taxes. You paid $100 in cost, but $1 over that $1 is capital gains, and you got to pay for it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but isn't there like a time frame that you have to own the property?
You have to own it for at least, they changed it, I believe it's now 5 years. So used to it was 2, now it's 5.
Okay.
So what would I
You
write
own
for
the
the married
property
couple?
for a minimum of 5, you can turn around, you can sell it, and you
Do
can
what?
have capital gains exclusion.
What would I write for the married couple? Single is 250.
Single is 250,000 and a married couple is
And then after
500,000.
that, if you are below, like, if I went to sell the house.
What?
Before the time limit.
Then
Oh,
you'll have to
we
pay
get the
taxes.
They'll be exempt from capital gains tax for 250,000 for a single and 500,000 for a married couple. Got it? The Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, that will actually be covered thoroughly in their finance course later on. So we're not going to go too much detail into that, but the goal is to protect families from unfair, abusive financial practices. And it's to consolidate accountability and responsibility. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or the CFPB, was created as a result of this act. And we're still conducting the closing. Know before you owe goals. The CFPB created 2 new forms to help consumers. The loan estimate must be provided to the consumer within 3 days. Remember, 3 days, big one. After receiving the loan application, and replaces the good faith estimate, or the GFE, and the Truth in Lending Act. So it basically took these 2 forms and put it into one form. The closing disclosure must be delivered to the consumer 3 days, again, 3 days prior to closing. And that's the form that replaced the HUD-1 settlement statement. You may still see the HUD-1 settlement statement. Sorry, I'm stuttering. But that's usually only for a cash deal that you'll see that. If they're paying all cash, you might see the HUD-1. If not, you're going to get the closing disclosure. So those 2 forms got taken over by that one, and then that one turned to the closing disclosure. The loan estimate has a 0 tolerance. They have a 10% limit on all third-party charges. Changes exceed limits. Loan estimates must be reissued within 3 business days, which resets the tolerances. The closing disclosure will be issued if, after it has been sent to the buyer, the lender increases the annual percentage by even 1/8 of a percentage, changes in the loan products, or he adds a prepayment penalty to the loan. When it is reissued, it triggers another 3 business days waiting period until closing. So if the APR goes down, it's not a big deal. It's not going to change anything. But if it goes up by even 1/8 of a percentage, they're going to have to redo the entire loan, and they're going to you're going to have to wait another 3 business days. So you're right before closing, it changes right then. You got to push closing back another 3 days, because it'll take at least 3 days for them to redo the loan. And that's even just 1/8 of a percent. 1/8 of a percent can cause the whole thing to need to be reissued. The Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, RESPA. RESPA is how you will see it on the test. It's a federal law enacted to protect consumers in the settlement process as follows. It requires accurate and timely information about the actual costs of the transaction, what costs are going to be involved, and they need to be accurate. It eliminates kickbacks and other referral fees. And kickbacks where people were paying, like bigger real estate firms, they were paying people for leads. They'd say, hey, you come online and I'll give you $1,000. And this law prohibits that now. And it was good for a while, but now that they've taken the kickbacks out, the smaller firms like us are having trouble getting up to the top like they were, because they had that advantage of being able to just pay someone to get the leads. But we cannot do that anymore. The most you can pay anyone for a referral fee who is unlicensed is $50. And that can't be in cash or anything. It's $50 either in a card, like a gift card or something like that. And they will test you on that as well. $50 is the max that you can get for a referral fee if the individual is not licensed. So the RESPA eliminated kickbacks and other referral fees, and it prohibits the lenders from requiring excessive escrow account deposits. They don't want people having to pay way too much in the beginning when they have to deposit into escrow. So RESPA protects the consumers from stuff like this. But please do remember, $50 referral fee, and it can't be cash. You will need to know that. That was tested for sure. More on RESPA. It does not apply to a transaction financed solely by purchase money mortgage taken back by a seller. Installment contracts, which is a contract for deed, or a buyer's assumption of the seller's existing loan. So RESPA will not apply if it's a purchase money mortgage, or if the assumption of the seller's existing loan is taken. Disclosure is required, of course, and that requires the lenders and settlement agents to provide a loan estimate, and the loan estimate will be after the application is filed. And RESPA also requires that lenders and settlement agents provide a closing disclosure to the borrower and the seller that itemizes all charges to be paid in connection with closing. So even if the money was paid up front, it must be included in the closing disclosure. So any credits that they've already paid must be in the closing disclosure as well. Lastly, on RESPA, following are the only 3 changes in the world require a new 3-day review period. So if these happen, it will require a 3-day review period. If they increase the APR, which we talked about earlier, by more than 1/8%, which is not very much, a fixed rate loan, or 1/4 of a percentage point for an adjustable rate loan. So it's 1/8 for a percentage, for a fixed rate, and it's 1/4 for an adjustable rate loan. Decreasing the interest, as I said, it doesn't cause a delay. If it goes down, and that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
You want your APR to go down. If it goes up, it's a whole different story. If they add a prepayment penalty it's going to require another 3-day review period, which, as we said before, the Obama administration did away with the payment penalty. So you might see it on loans that were done, because they're 30-year loans, you might still see them. But newer ones, you won't see that. And any changes in the loan product from a fixed rate to an adjustable rate, for example, would cause another 3-day review period. So if any of these things happen, you're going to have to push out 3 more days. 3 is a big number for
I was about to
today.
say that.
It's a big number for today.
3 days is for everything.
It's 3 days. Yeah. Just remember 3 days.
Yeah.
So now we're in prorations. We've gotten through everything. We're done. We've applied for a loan. We found a house. We put in a contract, sent it to the parties, paid it. We went to closing. We did our inspections, and that's a limo. Woo. There's a Hummer limo just drove by.
Nice.
That's mine. I gotta get.
Oh, you gotta go? Is that you? Is that for you? So we went through all that. Now we're done with closing. Now we're going to prorations. Certain charges are prorated, and they're divided between the buyer and seller in one of these ways. There's a yearly charge is divided by a 360-day year, which is a banking year, or 12 months of 30 days each. And a yearly charge is divided upon a 365-day year, or 366 if you're in a leap year. And that would make it much more difficult because you'd have to know the numbers that each, if it's a leap year, you're gonna need to know how many days are in each month.
Every 4 years.
Every 4 years. Yep. To determine the daily charge, the actual numbers of days in the proration period is determined, and the number of days is multiplied by the daily charge. In most states, including Texas, the charges are prorated as the date of closing. So you'll get prorations the day that you close. With the seller being responsible for the date of closing, the seller will dictate that. Some common prorated items: taxes, of course, mortgage insurance, insurance premiums, and rents. Yep, even rents.
So for example, if this VA you were renting your property to Wyatt, he's paying you $2,000 a month, and you have a 1-year lease, and he's renting out your property, and you decide I want to sell it to Travis. Okay, well y'all close and fund today. Everything starting tomorrow, the check would be prorated and give it to Travis, and that next full month, Wyatt would be making his payments to Travis, not to you. So you're not still entitled to the rent after you close because it's now Travis's property. That's why it
So
says
for the first
prorated.
month, I would get 13 days of rent.
It just threw me off because there's mortgage and rents under that, but I get it.
Yep.
And that covers basically the steps for being a real estate agent. Remember, always get approved first. If that's the one thing you can confirm,
Yeah.
get approved
That's
first.
very key.
But that was a rough outline of your.
You mean I can't go show 70 properties and then find out he's only approved for $40,000?
Oh, I mean, you can, but.
Yeah, you can.
I was wanting to waste money. That's
Oh
what I
yeah,
thought I
all
was
the
in
gas
this business
money,
for.
70
That's what I
properties.
thought I was in the business for. So, all right, I'm set.
Right. So we're gonna stop recording. We're gonna talk about what we're gonna do about the missed chapter as well as the final.
Were we still